All right, welcome to the January energy update. I have doing this one in by myself once more, just as because of the way that the dates and Dayna Grace was not quite available. So I wanted to make sure I got something out quick because it is January 2nd today. Um, it's already from the shifts in the movements and everything that I can feel between people's excitement and what they feel is coming for 2025 and all these things that are feel like they're becoming more tangible is probably the only way I can really explain that. Where I know for myself, my excitement is very tangible to me, and it's very much a reality of my own, but it wasn't always a reality I got to see or share with other people necessarily because they weren't able to feel the tangible piece of it actually going to happen in physical reality. A lot of us really still struggle a lot with the mind parts and, our brain telling us what's not actually happening in our physical reality yet. So it must not be real. And there's a lot of this back and forth happening in a lot of people's minds, and not just over the last year or two. It's been a start from when the new world started to really come into more of a space, possibly for people to recognize that there is truly change happening. It's just now we have to decide, which way does that change go? Does it turn into something that's going to serve us as humanity, or are we going to kind of repeat some old patterns here? And I mean, that started happening years ago, but I just feel like this year of 2025, now that it's here and we're officially, in it, a lot of this energy is very exciting, and yet at the same time almost scary for a lot of people because it does feel tangible this time. It does feel like it's kind of at our fingertips this time, where it's super magical in a sense, if you want to say it as excitement. But when the fear kind of creeps in behind it, it's almost like this notion where they just showed me like Harry Potter, where he's got to run through the wall to get to the train, and he can't quite grasp the fact that you have to run through this wall, right? But yet he gets excited enough by it and sees other people doing it that maybe he feels like he should get on there and give it a go. And when he runs to the wall, he finds out there's this whole other world that exists. And that's kind of what our generalization, even for this month, is kind of turning into already. And so there is this massive amount of excitement. And there's kind of, as we were talking in our community the other night, just before New Year's Eve, actually, we were discussing a little bit about this energy that's kind of up and coming here. And I do feel much very well as I was getting a sense that it was very much a theme for January already, that it's kind of like these two trains are in existence. And right now, near the end of December, they were still close enough where people could kind of hop back and forth. And the trains are in existence of, which energy do you really want to be sitting in? Do you want to be sitting in pain and suffering and the resistance of change and resisting things in self, resisting acceptance of self? We haven't all made great decisions in our lives at different points. It's nothing to be beating yourself up over. I know forgiveness of self is one of the toughest things for a lot of us to do, but we're at a point in our world now where you're going to start to get to you can really start to decide more for yourself and how much pain and suffering you want to sit in. Or if you just kind of let go of that, you don't have to make a lot of decisions. You can gradually just kind of get onto this larger boat, is what we're calling it, and go with more of the flow of what is actually happening and changing on our earth as a collective as well. So there's a bit of the two trains happening. So the excitement and the you know, don't know what it is. I don't know what's coming, but it just feels really exciting. It feels really good. It feels like there's going to be some pretty cool opportunities or really awesome things coming. Now, this month is going to be the month where you might see some people trying to flip flop still, but as the month goes on, you're going to notice there's a little bit more of a gap between these trains. And to me, in the recognition of that kind of analogy, it just tells me a little bit more about which do you choose to prefer to stay in, the old world or the new world? And of course, you could make that shift at any point as an individual, but I'm going to tell you more of the collective is getting on the train of excitement, because who doesn't like the feeling of excitement, right? Even if it scares us a little bit, there's a lot more people choosing courage and being like, hey, why wouldn't I want to choose something that lights me up, even though I don't know what exactly it is or why I'm becoming so excited by this. But that's the whole point of recognizing that energy exists as our first language. And we don't have to know what the end game looks like. We just have to know, hey, that's really exciting and that feels really good to me. And I want to get on that train. Even if I don't know the how, I don't know the in between, I'm going to ride that wave of energy because that's my preference. And so that's part of what's going to happen here in the month of January is you're going to start to notice, or you might see people around you. If you're already quite self-aware, you're already going to be able to really make that choice very easily. But if you're maybe around people that, maybe are not as self-aware, or maybe they're not as quite in tune, or they're still in that victim mode of blaming and shaming the world for, problems and everything else that's going on, and not yet realizing that they're in control of their own type of reality that they choose to see, because our realities come from our perceptions. And so if you're noticing this coming from, loved ones, maybe you've noticed it yourself, that's fine. But to know and give space of acknowledgement in the realms. And what I mean by that is, do not try to force people to see your perspective. Particularly this month, I feel as though you are going to want to feel like, hey, but there's so much better of an option. Why wouldn't you choose this? Like, come choose this with me. Even though we don't know what it looks like, hey, it feels really exciting. Why wouldn't you want to be a part of that? And this is where it can get a little bit frustrating for some of us, because we really want everybody, especially people we care about, to feel better or to see our perspective, because it makes us feel better. So why wouldn't it make someone else feel better? And this is not a month to try and push opinion or push perspective, even if we know that it probably would set some really awesome seeds and, grow some really amazing magical trees. But we are not in control of what someone else grows in their garden. So you can leave the seeds as breadcrumbs, and if someone comes to choose to pick them up, wonderful. And if not, we have to be okay with that. We have to say, okay, they're allowed to make their choice, because they're also here on their own journey, and recognizing that everybody is here exactly where they're meant to be, because that is what they've chosen at a free will level, right? Even if it doesn't look like the best place ever, maybe we know somebody's struggling, maybe we know somebody's hurting, or they're in a lot of pain or suffering, but it's not to feel down on self for feeling like we can't help them. The way that we can really start to help more people is by choosing to do it as an energetic state instead of words. Words are a tendency where we have to remember everybody usually has a different definition of certain things. And so our definition could mean something very lighthearted and from a loving space, but maybe that other person's definition is not in that kind of frequency. And so recognizing and remembering words are very powerful, yes, but they're powerful to us in our own perspective. They're still going to come through the filter that we all have, right? And so I would say for this month, if you notice somebody struggling or hurting, and you create this beautiful, I don't know, bubble of love and support, let's say, and you send it in their direction. And that's all we can really do when it comes to wanting to support another. Because again, words this month are going to be pretty potent, and they can be very toxic to certain people. It can bring up a lot of, undealt with emotions or undealt with states of being. And for a lot of people, they're going to want to fight that right away, because nobody wants to feel yucky. Nobody wants to feel, uncomfortable. And yet, hopefully by now, more and more people are realizing that being uncomfortable is something you can become more okay with, and it gets to be lessened. But at the same point, it is got to be a decision that one makes for self. No one can make that decision for anybody else. So in the month of January, maybe you've chosen your train and you're recognizing other people that maybe are sitting on the other train. And it's like the big picture window, you can see each other, but sometimes we just don't know how to get over to that space to help someone, or we're unwilling to jump, trains, of course, for ourselves, especially if we're feeling good on the one we're on. This is where I say you can send that energy instead, and you send it in a space of unconditional love, right? Not an expectancy of anything back, because when we expect something back, that's our ego saying, well, I gave you something, now I need to have something in return. And energy doesn't work like that. So if you can give it in a capacity that, and it's not going to drain you, because if you're wanting to truly, do what you can to help somebody, this is the best way of doing it, is through an energetic state and container, especially this month. this will be a little bit of a theme for 2025, I think, too, but we already have a podcast for the year of 2025 on a very general basis right now. And then, of course, as we go month by month throughout the year, we'll be able to kind of tune down into more of that energy as the collective chooses and decides, and depending on where we end up. So that's for this month, though, is the largest theme is the trains. On a more personal basis, this is a month to really dream big. And I say that because a lot of people are going to have these New Year's resolutions and things that they want to do. And, we kind of half-ass commit to it, but we never really commit to it. So this is the big part that energetic wise, if you want to have a large dream or you want to create a dream, I'm calling them dreams because I don't want you to break it down to goals yet, because that's not the point of this month. This month is to feel into that energy and become, again, riding that excitement train, to be able to ramp up some of that feeling and be able to refer back to it when needed. And as the months move on and we get through some of these other months in time, we'll reference more into probably what that means. But for this month particularly, it's just simply about becoming childlike again and dreaming. And what really lights me up? What is something I've always wanted to do? Is there a place you've always wanted to travel? I know some people might, yeah, but I want to make impact on the world. But you also have to remember, sometimes doing things for our personal own self to learn from or have an experience from allows us to make that impact with others, or allows us to help others in different ways. And so this is kind of like that creative ramp up that kind of will start to happen for quite a few this month, even if it's not maybe dreaming big, but maybe you feel really creative and you want to try something new or do a craft or something like that, that maybe you don't do all the time. Or maybe you're wanting to try different things that you've never really done or that you haven't done in a long time. And it's always that creative notion that often will start to come with what is going to happen here in January as the energy continues to flow. So creativity is going to be a large one that may come up for quite a few people. But I say, if you're not if you think you're not a creative person, I guarantee you are in some way or some direction. It's just society's probably told you that's not considered creative. And that's just not always true. Even sometimes I've known some people get wanting to read books, and that's actually when their creative flow starts, because they're actually looking for things that align with an idea that they just can't quite see yet. And sometimes books allow that to come into alignment, right? And so even sometimes reading is something of a creative type of flow, because it allows for knowledge and wisdom to be shared, so a larger picture comes together. So don't limit yourself onto what you're feeling in this month. You also may feel more like the dips might hit, meaning like where you might feel really creative one day and then the next day you wake up and it kind of might be gone. Or you're like, oh man, I really liked how I felt yesterday and I just kind of feel like blah today. This is again going to be a recognition of like, right, my body's still integrating all these things that are being in play on the earth, that are still being integrated on earth. And so sometimes we're just going to have those days where we just have to be okay with maybe not being in those really high states of being, because it's naturally part of who we are as human, because human bodies cannot keep up. They are the densest of densest type of energy, which means they need time to integrate certain things. And so you cannot be on a super high level constantly all the time. It is pretty hard for your body to stay there and be able to integrate what it needs to. Yes, we are moving to a point in time eventually that, yes, our bodies will naturally be at a higher state of being and be able to stay there more easily. But right now we are still in an integration period. So give yourself some grace if you're feeling like you just need to rest. Do your rest. It is still winter. The bodies still want to kind of hibernate a little bit, especially here in Canada. If you got snow and it's gross outside and you're not a winter person, your body's going to naturally kind of go into more of a slower stasis of being, because it's a time for, a revamp and to integrate and reflect. And then as we get into spring, we release a lot of that energy and then we hit the ground running. And it can be a very natural state, but it's kind of got to start here in the beginning of the year. And a lot of people run too hard, right? January hits, New Year hits, and everybody's like, okay, let's hit the ground running. And then by the time, we're 3 months in, everybody's exhausted, right? That's not the point. We're not trying to recreate patterns that we've been having go on, because they're not serving us any longer, not as individuals, but not also as humanity. So using that to your advantage of knowing, okay, I'm going to really practice with going with what my body is asking for this month, whether I understand it or not. Okay. This is like they kind of just threw me a little whisper of like, this is going to be a little bit of an overarching theme, I think, even for the next few months. But it's going to kind of start, they're showing me maybe closer to the end of this month, you might start to feel it kind of coming in a little bit. And it's this notion of, can you trust the unknown? Do you have to know every piece? Or does it actually just lead you into more questions and more confusion? Because a lot of the time, that's what's going to happen, especially if you're trying to understand the energetic world, if you're trying to understand energy, if you're trying to understand outside of our physical reality. There often only comes with more questions than there ever does like a full understanding. And so it's almost this notion of, can you trust your feeling behind things rather than a notion of having to understand every part of it? Because this is also going to lead us into what is coming throughout the year. There's going to be information that is going to be released this year. And for us to be able to decipher what is our truth out of that, we need to start being able to trust the unknown part of ourselves, the energetic side, to be able to be like, you know what? I don't need all the answers. I'm going to take that as truth for me or not. And being okay with not understanding every aspect of it. I am telling you guys, there's way too much that exists within outside of our planet. This is just an aspect of self that's being, portrayed here through our soul self. And for us to understand everything that exists outside of this planet, we already do. It's just not always meant for this conscious mind here. And it would be way too much for most of us to even comprehend half of what actually exists and how it works. Because there's no real written in stone formula when it comes to the universe or energy. Okay. It is constantly changing. And so for this month of January, you might feel more of that starting to come in towards the end of the month. Or maybe you're having an experience, or maybe you had something come up within you and you're kind of doubting yourself, or you're thinking, wow, this is really strange. I don't know what to think of this. I have a lot of questions around this. Questions is just your ego trying to make sense of it, because your ego is meant to make sense of the physical reality in front of us, but it's not supposed to figure out how all the energetics and everything work behind the scenes. He's kind of like the cameraman who can only film and see what's happening in the now, and it can't really predict or figure out how all those different pieces work. He's just meant to be there capturing the picture. And then it comes down to our own filters of understanding that, okay? And so challenging yourself a little bit more to say, do I really need all these answers? Am I just looking for the answers because I feel like I need the control? Because that's really a lot of the time what it comes down to for a lot of people. Understanding other people is a really another big one that they just shown. So when it comes to other people's behavior or things that they do, I mean, obviously this is coming from their own perceived notion of what their reality is and from their own beliefs. But it's this notion where a lot of people want to understand someone else. So they're like, oh yeah, well, let me stand in your shoes for 2 minutes, and let me try and see it from understanding from your way of seeing it. But the thing is we will never be able to do that, right? So it's going to be a notion of understanding, okay, I have my truth, they've got their truth, and maybe they're not in total alignment. Can I just be okay with that? Instead of trying to figure out all the pieces of why it would be not quite aligned, to make our brains feel like it has a better notion of the whole picture, when really all we're doing is building our own. Still, we're never going to understand someone else's picture, because it's only meant for them to understand, and for us to resonate with the frequencies that we resonate when it even comes to other people. If you're not resonating with somebody, that's okay. But you also don't have to keep choosing that, right? You have to just be able to accept the unknown piece of not fully understanding why all the time. So that'll be something too that you're going to start to feel possibly coming in towards the end of this month a little bit more. I think February, there'll be a bit more of that starting to happen. What else do we possibly have on the horizon? A deeper sense of compassion for some reason is what just came over me. A deeper sense of, it's not sympathy, okay? This is something I want to make sure I'm not confusing in the way that this is coming across. It's not sympathy, but it's compassion. It's almost this sense of heightened emotional state of being that is even coming across some of the people that maybe you would have called cold in the past, or maybe they're kind of breaking the ice and allowing different emotion to show through, or where they seem really understanding of someone else's, not just situation, but of their emotional capacity of what they might be feeling. And this is quite interesting because this is very different compared to what I would say I've ever felt it come through before. It is not in a space where people are going to do this because, they might be doing it to try and meet somebody else's expectation of them. It's coming from a true heart-centered space of a compassionate place where our energetic bodies have gotten to as a collective. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that because I think that's the easiest way of kind of putting it into a larger generalized notion. But the sense of compassion in people is going to become more heightened again, too, as this year goes on. And hopefully, as we continue to choose change for the higher and greatest good of our whole humanity and the human consciousness, that this is a very actual natural part of ourselves being collectively connected as a human species. Our whole consciousness is known as, of course, the human collective consciousness, which means, as possibly you've heard before us explain, like the tree, where yes, we're all individuals, but we are all connected as well. And there seems to be a heightened capacity of that coming up here. Even again, maybe hitting more towards the middle of this month, but this notion of really starting to have more of this sense of not just self, but more as a collective whole, which brings a lot more compassion to a lot of people. And it's not to say that we're going to accept people's excuses and all the things that maybe, they want to throw out there for why they're doing this or that or what's going on. And it's not a sympathy either for where people are at. It is a compassionate state where people are going to start to feel an understanding as a whole and as a collective that where people's emotions might be, that one can truly understand that emotion, maybe not necessarily always the situation, right? But the emotion, it doesn't matter what the event or situation has caused that to have happen. That emotion is still the same. So it'll be this greater capacity where some might start to feel really quite supported in a way, even without words. It's just maybe even somebody showing up to have a cup of tea one day or coffee, and it's no words are being said. It's just a sense of compassion, even from strangers on the street, where you may start to recognize and seeing that even happening more around you. So it's going to be something here that might, again, catch people off guard if you're not really prepared for something like that. But hopefully it will catch people off guard in a really good way, in a way where it's like, hey, I've really noticed some magical things happening with the way people seem to just have this compassion towards other people. Yeah. And again, you're not going to see the big grand gesture behind it. It's going to be subtle at first, but it's also going to be kind of a theme that you'll start to see grow over the next little while here. And so in January, if you get a little bit more emotional, ask yourself, okay, where is this coming from? Maybe I have somebody around me right now that I'm actually feeling compassion for, rather than necessarily just being my own stuff coming up, right? You got to remember how connected we are, becoming more and more aware. The more of us become aware of self, the more of us that become aware of self become aware of the universal self and the collective consciousness. And so the more people that are becoming aware of these things, the more activated it's all becoming, whether people are, in that kind of state of being or not. So, and either way, again, there's no right or wrong to this. It's just where people are choosing to be at an individual level, but no one understands it's growing. And so with that growing capacity, it is changing the collective consciousness into a different state of being. And so we are able to feel differently through that conscious level. So keep that in mind for this month, for not just yourself, but as a general kind of theme, overarching, choose the train that you want to really be on. And I mean, some people, if you recognize, hey, I've been choosing the pain and suffering, but it's coming from that unconscious basis likely. Well, now you've just become conscious of it. So you're allowed to start changing it at any moment in time. We're not saying that, January is the train you're going to get stuck on. That's absolutely not how this works. You could change at any moment. And, there will be people that go from the excitement train back to the pain and suffering, depending on the events or situations that might happen, right? We might have some things that might flip-flop us a few times. But the thing about it is it's going to become easier and easier and easier to recognize which one you're on. You're not going to, flip trains and realize, oh shit, I was sleepwalking and I walked into the other train. I don't know how many days, weeks, months that I've been here for. It used to be like that, even 6, 7, 8 years ago. It was harder to decipher because our energies were not what we like to call like the golden window, where it is becoming a thicker window than it ever has been before, or some are calling it the veil, where the veil is becoming thinner and thinner. And so it's easier to recognize what kind of energy you're more entwined with, rather than it all just, being one big thing. And you would have to take quite a bit of work to get your own field clear before you could really recognize what was going on inside yourself. So know that this is becoming an easier thing. Even if you find yourself, flip-flopping a little bit, that's okay. It's going to be easier to recognize where you're at going forward. But the self-awareness is always a key piece to doing this. If you're like, oh man, I've never done this before, that's okay. You can always start today. You woke up again this morning, which means you've got another chance to choose something different if that's really what you want. And so I'm encouraging all of you to try and just be aware of self the best you can, and to listen to what those whispers are that seem to come through, because that is your golden arrow of likely what you are looking to do that would very much fulfill you, but not just you, but as that larger impact so many of us are wanting to make in the world. So in whatever way that looks, it doesn't mean you have to be standing on a stage, talking about all the things. Maybe it's an invention. Maybe it's a little something of information you just happen to put out there under a pen name, and people just love it because it helps somebody. We always, or make somebody's life easier, right? Maybe there's things out there that you're like, yeah, I just had this really grand idea and I don't really want to be known for it, but I want to create it and put it out there for the world to be able to have somebody's life be a little bit easier, right? So again, that creative flow could come from anywhere. It could look like anything. Don't judge yourself for whatever it might be that shows up for you. Just follow it and then test and find out how you're feeling when you're doing it. And that will start to show you being able to regulate what train you're going to be on as well. So I wish you all a happy, wonderful January, a month of January. And again, Happy New Year to everybody. 2025 is going to be a killer year. Again, it's just going to be about your awareness and choosing it. Okay. But we start month by month. So let's get through January 1st, and we will see you on our next podcast.